Bet the Board presents Stay Green. Stay Green is your first stop for all the metrics, matchups, and money-making opportunities at the track each race week. This is Stay Green, the NASCAR betting podcast. Here are your hosts, Todd Fuhrman and racing analyst Chris Werme.
Welcome into the Stay Green podcast, part of the Bet the Board podcast network. Spoiler alert, ladies and gentlemen, no guest on today's show. You're just stuck with me as your host, and as always, my esteemed co-host. But I'm Todd Fuhrman, joined as always by Chris Werme, professional bettor and NASCAR expert extraordinaire. Wormser, are you ready to carry us home to the finish line today with a more traditional show format?
Yeah, I'm excited. This is one of my favorite tracks, so I don't want to get too excited about I thought Dover was a great race, and then we're heading into like kind of the thick of the season where I think we'll see the guys that are going to be competing for a championship if we haven't already seen that yet. So I think it's a good time to maybe take a break from a guest and actually talk about some of the analytics that will go into these next couple races.
Yeah, a couple of big racetracks coming up. We'll go to Kansas, more on that in just a matter of moments. Darlington next weekend. And then, of course, we have a little bit of a break for the All-Star race with a unique format in North Wilkesboro before the crown jewel of the Coke 600 Memorial Day weekend. But for those folks who may be tuning into the Stay Green podcast for the very first time, we'll break things up today. Stage one, all about what we learned last weekend from Dover and what we might be able to apply going forward. Stage two, driver breakdowns and the drivers you need to know before betting the race this weekend. And stage three, something that's come up a number of times, a little bit more comprehensive NASCAR betting question that I think is worth revisiting, albeit a sport right now that seems to reward the favorites in the outright market more often than not. But we went to the Monster Mile last week. It was Denny Hamlin holding off Kyle Larson in the final laps. You can make the case that the 5 and the 11 were the two best cars more or less from start to finish, but the 24 done in by a poor pit stop ruined his day. The 19 of Martin Truex Jr. ends up having his nose taken out, making contact with Alex Bowman, so probably took him out of contention, although still with a podium finish. But what did you see at Dover? Anything stand out to you? Anything disappoint? Your overall sentiments on the race we saw unfold on Sunday?
I thought it was a great race. I think that kind of the end and the aero blocking, I guess, kind of tainted NASCAR fans' view of what happened in the race. But if you go back and look throughout certain stages of the race, there were times when I thought Ryan Blaney had the best car. There were times when I thought William Byron had the best car. There were times when I thought Denny had the best car. I certainly thought we got to the point when Truex took the lead. I go, this could be one of those stinker races where Truex just kind of leads 75% of the laps. He looked so damn strong.
That's what Martin does. When Martin gets to the lead, Martin has been known to snooze the field in the past.
Yeah. And I kind of thought we were headed there. So it was nice for the first, and then obviously Larson to be able to drive through the field. It was nice to see multiple guys have speed kind of and work their way through traffic. And I think that's where the great race cars last week were able to kind of set themselves apart, is when those leaders caught the tail end of the field. Is, how much were those lap down cars slowing them up? If they were able to make moves, whether it was on the bottom or on the top, and navigate those lap cars, I think that kind of really set the stronger cars away from those average cars.
Do you really want to spend time today talking about lap down cars? Do you want to get it off your chest how you felt about the 99 and his 37 lucky dogs that may or may not have ruined a race car that thankfully we protected the Stay Green listeners from, electing to go with Gragson over Austin Dillon for a best bet. But there was a lot of deliberation after that pre-race poll that we were going to bet against Daniel Suarez with Josh Berry. That comes home a winner. And also with Chase Briscoe, who comes up just short. Yes, I know they finished 18th and 19th respectively, but major difference with a lap down when you're the lucky dog more often than not.
Oh, man. He got the lucky dog twice, and he stayed out and got 2 laps back on a pit cycle and got a caution. Very bitter.
Bitter worm, party of one.
Bitter
worm,
worm.
party of one.
But we talked about it with Larry Mack. When these cars are average, when you just have an average race car and you're not really even cracking the top 25, which is not what Suarez was doing, why not stay out? I mean, there's no downside risk. Your downside risk is you go from 25th to 29th. It costs you 4 points. With upside risk, you find yourself in the top 20, and you didn't even have to drive there. It was just luck. So,
Or top 10 if you're Daniel Hemrick.
or top 10 if you're Daniel Hemrick. Someone that I said was going to be irrelevant. Someone chirped me for that, by the way.
I did. I caught that on social media. I chose to ignore it.
Good call on Hemrick being irrelevant. It's like after 15 laps, he had lost like 22 spots, but he somehow finds himself. Yeah, he got his car better, and Daniel Hemrick is a very capable race car driver and was able to kind of hang on to that top 10, which, it's always nice to have someone chime in and say, hey, gotcha. But I would say biggest takeaways for me, William Byron had an issue and did not work his way back through the field. He was a guy we kind of had circled as one of those guys where if he does have an issue, he can overcome that. Now, the issues are rare. This is a rare chink in the armor for this 24 team. But he also didn't come back like we've seen other drivers. On the flip side, Chase Elliott, a little bit of momentum coming from Texas, starts deep in the field, works his way maybe to the top 10. I can't remember, like 9th, 10th, 11th there at the end of stage one.
He gets a good pit stop, though. He picked up 10 plus positions from the pit stop. But again, he puts himself in a position to earn those spots on pit road. And as we've seen, it is a very important part of the calculus and equation, not just as bettors, but the era we're in now with the next gen car.
And I think the final takeaway is just, briefly talking about Kyle Busch. We had Reddick over Busch as the best bet. Man, Kyle put it on the pole with a fast race car and some talent. I don't think he was ever a threat to win the race. But man, he just hung around the top 5. And that's something you can do when you steal track position. When Daniel Hemrick did it, if Daniel Hemrick can do it, Kyle Busch can certainly do it. So it just kind of an interesting, I thought a great weekend for racing. I thought the Xfinity, again, just unbelievable show week in and week out. But I thought that the Cup Series was a good race. Man, this Denny Larson thing, to go back to what I think they said 8 times, Larson's finished second to Denny. And how many times has Denny finished second to Larson?
I believe 0. When Denny has a chance to win the race, he beats Kyle Larson when they finish 1-2.
Yeah, so should we just refer to Larson as Denny's bitch? Or
until we see things change there, that appears to be the way that it's playing out.
Trying to light a fire over this. Like, I would love a Larson Hamlin duel. I don't know. I just Larson just has so much speed. He just doesn't get it done. Denny cashes tickets. Period. End of story.
He cashes outright tickets. Matchups remain to be seen. The only time he cashes matchups is when he wins the race.
Yeah, he might cash a ticket for the odds makers when he wrecks out of the race. But all in all, good race. I love Dover. It's probably the track that I have circled as the next place I'd like to go. I think it'd be cool to see the cars go that fast, spend that much time in the corner, the elevation change, the G's. I think it'd be an awesome race to go see. So maybe a little field trip next year.
I would have liked to see a little bit more tire fall off there over the course of the longer runs, but alas, you can't have it all. Good racing and a track that quite frankly rewards the best drivers in the sport, regardless of what package we take to Dover more often than not. You can follow Chris on social media at Chris Werme15. I'm Todd Fuhrman. You can follow me there for all things Bet the Board. Be sure to follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. And Worm, after we wave the green, white checkered flag officially on stage 1, we head into stage 2 and we look at Kansas, the AdventHealth 400 this weekend, a 1.5-mile tri-oval. First race in the Cup Series came here back in September 30th, 2001. We've been coming here essentially twice a year since 2011. When we look at our track specs, I don't want to call it a cookie cutter 1.5 miles, but suffice to say from a track comp standpoint, most similar to Vegas and Charlotte, if we want to call it a sister track.
Yeah, exactly. It's going to be the same tire that we saw at Vegas and Texas. I would put a little bit more weight on, I guess if we were to look, I would say its closest comp would be Charlotte, because I feel like there's a little bit more fall off at Charlotte, kind of like there is at Kansas. But Vegas so far this year will be the closest comp that we've seen. I will take a little bit of that, some of those results, maybe mix in just what your eyeballs saw at Texas. just who has raw speed on these 1.5-mile tracks. And then the 4 races that we've seen the last 2 years in this next gen car will be what I'm using to handicap this race, at least at this point in the week.
A couple of notes before we get into the tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 drivers. Hendrick drivers overall have led 46% of the laps in the 2 Kansas races here last year. Kyle Larson clearly has a lot to do with that. And when you look at Hendrick drivers, they've won both races at non-drafting 1.5-mile tracks this season. It was Kyle Larson winning back at Las Vegas and Chase Elliott taking home the checkered flag to end that long losing streak at Texas. So when we look at the prices that are out there, depending on the shop, Kyle Larson and Denny Hamlin, more or less co-favorites. And when we look at Kyle Larson, his current form, 6 stage wins, tied for the most after 11 races in a season that we've ever seen, but only 1 victory to his credit, 5 top 5s, 5 top 10s, an average finish of 9.8 over his last 5 races, including 3 podium finishes in his last 5. When we look at Kyle Larson at Kansas since 2021, that even predates the next gen era, Larson's led 132, 130, 29, 0, 85, and 99 laps. So you can pretty much count on the 5 getting to the front at least at one point, but the wins haven't been there as much as the 5 team would like. When you look at Kyle Larson 9-2, I know you're not going to want to bet against him, but are you betting on him, knowing that we've seen Larson could start 25th and the odds will shorten by the time we get to race day?
Yeah, I mean, there's part of me that just wants to bet Larson and then just call it a week. Like, hey, we'll just take our chances.
Which is a fair way to do it. I think you could do a lot worse when it comes to building a card this weekend at Kansas.
Yeah, I think Larson should be the favorite. I kind of want to lump Denny in there, but listen, Larson's going to be the favorite the next few weeks. I mean, we're going to go to Darlington. I imagine him, Truex and Denny next week. And then you go to Charlotte. It's going to be those, to be Denny and Larson again. And this is the same conversation we have. I just copied and pasted the same thing. Yes, Kyle Larson should be the favorite and he can win this week. However, Denny tends to beat him when it comes down to those two. And sometimes he makes mistakes and doesn't, DNF. So, if someone just said they're betting Kyle Larson 9-2 and that's all they're taking this week, I'd say, you know what? That's actually not a bad card. And if you look back at this last race last year, I want to kind of, before we get into everything, if you were to tell me that there's going to be a long green flag run and then there's going to be a caution with, 6 laps to go, I probably wouldn't bet this race. Like with everything that can happen, you saw 2 tires, you saw 4 tires, you saw a funky restart with Denny hanging back and, then his, Reddick winning and kind of just a weird scenario. If you were to tell me right now, Worm, there's going to be a 30 lap run and then caution with 6 to go, would you bet this race? My answer would be no. The reason we call this podcast Stay Green is we want long green flag runs to get to the finish and to help us get to the window. So I like Larson, but I don't know. I'd rather just see. His price is pretty steady. I don't think it's going up nor down. If anything, slightly down, but I'd rather wait and see.
Yeah, I don't think he's a driver that even if he's starting 30th in the field with a backup car that he's drifting past 6-1 at the top of the market. If so, not going to last all long. And Denny Hamlin, another guy, when we look at Denny's current form, he's led laps in each of the last 15 races. It's the longest active streak in the series. Last driver with a longer streak was Kyle Busch, who did so in 17 races in a row back in 2017. We look at Denny, 3 top 3s in his last 7 races. Lo and behold, all of those are victories. He's led 16% of all laps in the series so far this season. And when we talk about track history, going all the way back even before the next gen, 5 straight finishes of 5th or better. Hasn't started better than 6 in that span, so heaven help the rest of the field if he does put this thing on the pole. But when we look at Kansas, a driver rating of 100 plus and 8 out of 9 trips, we know we're talking about race contenders come Sunday. The 11 will very much be in the conversation.
Yeah, he hasn't qualified well here, but that doesn't seem to matter. I think, gosh, he just kind of figures it out. I think he said, I think Kansas and Vegas are the 2 places where, he kind of unloads average. And, I think his average starting spot is 16.3 over these 4 races, 18th, 25th, 8th.
Better be better top finish starting spot this week.
We have a little matchup, but I mean, who's he matched up against? Someone that qualifies much worse still.
Yes,
so
correct.
Listen, Denny's going to be there. When you have this conversation one to wait till you kind of had talked about Denny's stats, but I would be more shocked. Like if you were to tell me someone was going to lead 200 of the 267 laps and win the race, I would tell you I would be more shocked if it was Denny Hamlin than Kyle Larson. If someone's going to go out and dominate the race, I'd say it would be Kyle Larson. If I were to say someone just kind of their average running spot was 8th and someone was 4th, I'd say it's probably more likely that Larson runs 8th on average and Hamlin runs 4th. Like, it's just so weird, the dynamic of these guys. But if you were to tell me who I think wins the race, it's like, well, if it's a heads up battle, you got to take Denny Hamlin, but if it's a long green flag run, I mean, even Denny's run down Kyle and long green flag runs here in the spring last year. So it's just kind of an interesting thing, this Denny versus Larson. They're very different drivers. I wish I could just bet Larson to lead more laps. I certainly think Larson will lead more laps. But
that's a new matchup type that I don't think any book is running to offer. Which driver will lead more laps? Something tells me that we would be able to. Yeah, they should. They should do a lot of things, but the bottom line is this: we can't get traditional markets. So I don't think
you mean offer more than 4 matchups?
That's a different discussion for a different day, other than a couple of shops out there. But when we mention Toyotas, Tyler Reddick and Martin Truex Jr. also see their odds relatively short. It was Reddick emerging victorious with a win here at Kansas last fall. He's the only driver to finish in the top 5 at both Las Vegas and Texas so far this season, as we talked about the 2 most recent races on 1.5-mile tracks. He started no worse than 5th at Kansas in 4 races there with the next-gen car. As far as his overall track history, 9th and 1st in his 2 starts with 2311 Racing. You can look at RCR, but those come with an asterisk. Meanwhile, Martin Truex Jr. ended a streak of 3 straight races outside the top 10 with his 3rd-place finish at Dover, his home track that comes in the wake of his brother winning the Xfinity race. An average finish better than 9th over his last 9 races overall. 437 laps led so far this season, but 228 of those came at Richmond. And when we talk about next-gen track history, 36 in the fall, had a flat tire early. You can throw out that data point. Prior to that, 8 straight top 10 finishes predating the next-gen car. So when we're looking elsewhere in the Toyota camp, either of these 2 drivers catch your eye?
Yeah, man. I feel like this Reddick guy he's priced with the big dogs. I don't know that I'd be rushing to bet Reddick from an outright perspective. I know he qualifies well here. He's won here, but he also has a couple of tough finishes here. I think he's a little overpriced right now. I just don't see him kind of in that same category as Larson and Hamlin yet. Doesn't mean he won't be there. I know his average finishes the last couple years is pretty good with the win, but he didn't go out there and kind of take the race away from a green flag speed perspective. It was more a late race caution, funky restart, and he was able to take the win. So I don't know what happens if there's a 30 lap run, to the end of the race last year. Maybe Hamlin runs him down, maybe Larson does. So maybe a little overvalued. Now, Martin Truex Jr., unfortunately, we'll never know how good his car was last fall because they ran over something on pit road, and
his day was over before it
started. But he's been very consistent here, and he does qualify well here. If you throw out that 36th place finish, the most recent time we went to the track, not most previous. See,
there we go, Wormser. Way to improve that English, buddy. Good step in the right direction, kind sir.
His other 3 finishes are 6th, 5th, and 8th, and he does have the average the 3rd most laps led, more than Denny Hamlin by 1 lap. So I think Martin Truex Jr. is going to be strong. It's just can they put a complete race together? I think did he open 8 or did he open 10? I'm sure he probably has taken a little bit of money.
Some books had him a shade higher, 8 on the low end where we're talking about him now. Maybe there were a couple shops out there that had him at 10.
Yeah, Truex is going to be good. I just don't see him going off much shorter. That's all.
No, fair assessment. When we talk about the 19, I mean, he's got to show something pretty special in practice to leapfrog some of the heavyweights at the top of the field. Yeah. And then when you mentioned William Byron, I mean, 5 consecutive top 10 finishes on 1.5-mile tracks, longest active streak in the series, 5 straight top 7 finishes, ended last week with the wreck at Denver. Denver at Dover. I knew it was going to happen
Denver.
one of these times. No, he wasn't in Denver last week. It was at Dover. But that's what happens when you end up getting shuffled to the back of the field. It puts you in a precarious position. When we look at how he's been in the next gen track history, 5 of 6 starts have come from inside the top 10. That even goes back before next gen time. Only 2 finishes outside the top 10 in his last 7 starts here. So William Byron, a guy that's been good, in my opinion, all season long, but just not great week in, week out.
Yeah, he used to be 3 weeks ago, we'd have called him Mr. Consistent, and now we just aren't seeing that out of him. Struggling a little bit. I know that Denver track is pretty different than most other tracks.
I thought the Rocky Mountains are going to be a lot Rocky Mountain,
yeah,
a lot rockier than this. That John Denver's full of shit.
Yeah, but he was really strong at Vegas. I do think he's going to run well here. He opened 10. I think I texted you that saying something like Byron's going to move. Obviously, anytime you're going to open him at double digit odds to win the race, he's going to take some money. But I still think that he'll probably qualify pretty well. And if someone came up to me and said, they like Byron, I would agree. I think he could be strong. But he hasn't worked his way back up to the field. He does have some, an average running position here of 13.1 is not what I expected to see, especially when we have guys like Denny Hamlin with average running positions of 8 and Kyle Larson with average running position of 7. That's a significant difference. So I do think Byron will be good, but not going to get any money from me at this 8-1 price.
When we transition into tier 2 drivers, it's where things start to get relatively interesting. Chase Elliott, 12-1. Bubba Wallace, 12-1. Christopher Bell, 12-1. As far as Chase Elliott is concerned, top 5 finishes now in 4 out of 5 races. You talk about gaining speed. Chase Elliott has been the embodiment of such. Next gen track history, stage points in 6 of 8 stages, have led laps in 3 of the 4 next gen races at Kansas, but the finishes just haven't been where I'm sure the 9 team would like. Bubba Wallace, back-to-back finishes outside the top 30 leading into this race, 3 top 5s, 4 top 10s on the season, but he's outside the playoff picture looking in right now. But when it comes to Kansas, back-to-back top 5s, including a win before he finished 32nd in the fall race. And then there's Christopher Bell, who goes from hot to cold, 4 straight finishes of 17th or worse, coming directly on the heels of 4 straight top 10s, was collected in incidents in back-to-back weeks. Last week at Dover, of course, the qualifying effort didn't really help his ability to try and make himself relevant. But when we talk about Kansas, a driver rating of 100 plus in 3 out of 4 next-gen races, we look at those 3 drivers, anybody that interests you as a buy, anybody that interests you as a sell, or otherwise ambivalent feelings towards this particular trio.
Well, Chase is interesting to me because we know what he's capable of. We've seen him go out there and win a championship, and it's to see him at 12-1 running strong. I mean, what he did at Dover was a solid run. The only issue is he wasn't able to make a lot of ground once he kind of hit that top 5. It was almost like he was like a 6th, 7th place car that was drastically better than cars outside the top 10, but maybe, a little bit off the pace of those drivers that were in the top 5. It's headed in the right direction. And I just don't, if it were any other track where Denny and Larson and Reddick weren't so strong, I could see him. I could see a 12-1 bet as offering some value. But where is he gonna? He's gonna qualify. I don't think he's gonna qualify in the top 3 or 4, and I do think those other guys will. So we could see a better number on Chase, and he's also a guy that even when his car is good in practice, last week he slipped up in qualifying. So he's not this great qualifier like we've seen out of guys like Chris Bell who do qualify really well and, have those 3 driver ratings of over 100, led laps here, but ultimately qualifies well. Just hasn't had the long run speed that we've seen out of some of these other cars. So I know that, you meet a lot of people on Twitter, and a buddy, Jacob, who just blowing me up about Bell, how he wants to bet Bell.
Hey, I can't say anything. I was,
and then you did the same thing.
Week. I texted you and I go, I think he's undervalued in all the matchups. He's going to have potential race winning speed. And we're going to look 100 laps in at Dover and be kicking ourselves that Christopher Bell was, plus 115, plus 120-ish. And I couldn't have been more thankful that when he wrecked out, I had no Bell exposure for the first time in ages when he gets shuffled to the back.
Yeah, Well, at least you came at me with a 12-1 price. Jacob said he liked him at 10. So I gotta make sure that I roast him a little bit for that. But listen, I like Bell. I just, man, when things aren't going well, they're really bad. So can he turn around qualifying? Yeah, man, quite possibly. I think that there's some odds on him to win the pole at 8-1. I think that's a kind of a handsome price. But I don't know. I at 12, I just think that these top three guys are just going to keep odds on other drivers elevated enough to where you can wait till after practice and qualifying and still get a decent number. So Chris Bell also falls into that category.
Same thing for Bubba. I know you, if you want
Yeah,
to touch on him
Bubba.
real quick,
Gosh,
he's a
think,
guy right now. I honestly can't bet at a price this short. I don't have enough confidence in his ability to go out there and run up front. He can, and it wouldn't shock me because if you had to pick his best track, this is probably it. But I
yeah,
look at some of the matchup prices, that Westgate put out, and Bubba's right around to pick him against Chris Bell and Chase Elliott. And if you're going to make me blindly bet those guys before I see these cars unload, I'm going to bet the 9 car of Chase Elliott, and I'm going to bet the 20 car of Christopher Bell, and hope they go out there, put together good runs, because I would be shocked if Bubba ends up flipping the script there and ends up as a 40-1, somewhere in that minus 140, minus 150 range in a head-to-head.
Yeah. The thing with Bubba, this price to me is because he's in a Toyota. We just haven't seen that same speed out of him. I thought Bubba last year was a little faster on some of these 1.5-mile tracks where he was qualifying and in running kind of in the top 4 or 5, where we've seen a little bit out of that out of, easy for me to say, we've seen a little bit of
both
that
on the struggle bus
on
today when it
short
comes to
track.
English
Like,
and articulation. So
he's run well actually on short tracks. I actually think that the short track package has agreed with him a little more and much more than and Chris Bell. I mean, if we're running that package here at Kansas, I'd love Chris Bell, but we just haven't seen the same intermediate speed out of either of the 23 or the 20. So they could be good. Like, don't get me wrong, but at this point, I don't think those prices are going anywhere with these top 3 guys priced so short.
Ty Gibbs, Alex Bowman, the final 2 drivers that I had listed in terms of tier 2 qualifiers. Ty Gibbs, he's led 6 total laps since COTA, 5 straight finishes, 10th or worse. Again, rinse and repeat when it comes to the 54 in terms of how he's being priced, more on expectations than what we've seen for Kurt Fuhrman. Alex Bowman, look, his form has been good. 3 top 10s in his last 4 races, 5 top 10s over his last 7 in general. Did miss the spring race at Kansas last year because of injury, but he's been 11th or better in 6 to 7 trips to Kansas. A guy, in my opinion, probably a top 10 qualifier, or a top 10 candidate, I should say.
Yeah.
But somebody I'm not sure is going to factor in the ability to win a race unless things break perfectly for him.
Well, it was nice to hear him get a little angry on the radio, with his teammate and Kyle Larson, and then to see his spotter Kevin Hamlin kind of chirp back at him. It was kind of an interesting back and forth. I like seeing a little bit out of this 48. He can win races if he has a car capable of winning and he gets up there and he gets a lead. It's tough to wrestle from him. So he does have a great history here. I know that he missed one of those races with the injury, but his average finish is 7.7 with a 9th, 4th, and 10th. 1 top 5, and 18-1's getting you paid. He's been qualifying a little bit better. He's not one of those guys that's starting 18th or 19th. You just kind of have to hope he works his way up into the top 10, so that way you can back him in matchups or even a top 10. This is a guy that's starting to qualify a little bit better, kind of in that 8th to 12th place. And if he finds himself with a race-winning car, he's going to be up front. So I don't hate Alex Bowman at 18-1. I don't like Ty Gibbs at 16. We have not seen as much out of him, in these recent weeks. I don't know why, but he's just not. He hasn't had race-winning speed. At least Alex Bowman last week, at one point, I live bet him at 15-1 or something, thinking, oh my gosh, he's about to take the lead away from Kyle Larson. The minute that Ty Gibbs is wrestling with Kyle Larson for the lead is the time when I think that he should actually warrant this 16-1 price. But we just haven't seen it. He's been solid, but never a threat to win, in my opinion.
No, and I think that's a fair way to look at it. Getting a lot more market respect than what we have actually seen from him in terms of overall on-track performance, especially of late. As far as tier 3 is concerned, you can pick and choose which of these guys you want to touch on and elaborate with their potential race winning credentials this weekend, or buys or sells as it may be in the matchup market. Ross Chastain, 20-1, Ryan Blaney, 20-1, Kyle Busch, 25-1. And I'd be remiss if I didn't at least include RFK, although these drivers have drifted. So do shop around, and both
Yeah.
Brad K and Chris Buescher in terms of the way they're being priced throughout the market. But, Chastain, next gen track history, 3 finishes, 7th or better, 13th in his last start here. Ryan Blaney, 3 finishes of 12th or worse in 4 next gen races, but amongst the Fords at 1.5 miles. So, I mean, look, Ryan Blaney is the guy that you have to be paying attention. There may be one other Ford that we'll touch on a little bit later in the program that's not being priced the way he needs to be. Kyle Busch, next gen track history at Kansas, started 16th or worse in 2 races here as a member of RCR, but did race his way up through the field a little bit, finished 7th in the fall, 35th in the spring, but that came after an accident and a driver rating of 83 or worse in the last 3 trips here. And then RFK just not showing a ton of race winning speed, and kudos to the odds makers, making it extremely difficult, treating those two in their head-to-head matchups more or less like their F1 teammates, the only way you can bet into them in a pre-week against one another. So,
Yeah. Gosh, Kyle Busch, did they turn a corner? Is this going to be someone that's going to qualify well and run in the top 10?
look, the one thing I will say that may have been lost, he did start up front, which was something that he hasn't done all that often, but I can't remember which run it was. Maybe it was in stage 1 where he was falling like a brick, but they were able to right the ship. And it's not like he fell from 1st to 8th to 15th. He was able to stabilize things. And later in runs, the deeper we got into that race, Kyle Busch was passing cars. I mean, with some of those restarts, he was able to take advantage and make some moves. So maybe there's a little bit to be excited about for the 8. Still not commanding the respect of odds makers, as we can understand. But I am very, very curious to see how he runs this weekend.
Yeah, I agree. RFK, man, just high expectations entering the year. And I think for them, it all starts in qualifying. They start behind the 8 ball almost every week, starting, 18th or worse, it seems like, week in and week out. They have to steal track position. It's so hard to grind your way up, kind of one position at a time. I don't think that the Fords have just had enough speed to do that. It just makes for tough racing when you're starting that deep. Ask Kyle Busch how much easier his weekend was last week when he qualified on the pole. I'm not saying you even need to qualify on the pole, but just give yourself a top 7 or 8 starting spot. It's hard enough on pit road when you just are competing against 36 other drivers. Throw in, tough entry and exit of your stall. And as tight as these times are, you lose 4 or 5 spots just because of where your pit stall is, makes for a long day. So they have to get that going. I really think that qualifying is as important as I've ever seen it in the sport, as hard as it is to pass. So they got to get that cleaned up. It's been a rough qualifying for them. Chastain and Blaney, my notes for Blaney are, well, he drives a Ford. So I thought he was going to be a little bit better. The Fords, I'm sure Blaney's good in clean air and when he's running in the top 3, but get back in traffic. And I think that's where the Fords are lacking relative to these Hendrick cars and to the Gibbs cars. Boy, Chastain, man, if he was going to run well somewhere, it would be Dover or Denver, as you like to say. But
it'll always be Denver to me, Worms. It'll always be Denver to me.
I don't know. Chastain at 20, you're not going to get a lot of an argument from me. But he is a guy that doesn't qualify that well, although he did qualify well here last fall. I don't think there's any reason to touch him. And if Ross looks good and his price is down in that, even 12 to 15 to 1 range, I still think you're getting properly paid for a good driver that, when he has a solid car, can get a good finish for you.
I mean, all these guys, more or less a pick 'em against one another in some of these head-to-head matchups. When you look at the way odds makers have viewed them, Chastain and Blaney, pick 'em. Alex Bowman against Ross Chastain, pick 'em. Ty Gibbs, a slight favorite over Ross Chastain. That has boomer bust potential, depending on how those guys look. So just some things to think about as well. Before we close,
that could be based on qualifying too. I would say that
look, if you're betting a matchup that aren't widely available this early in the week, you just want to try and get out ahead of it. You obviously want to have a car that you think can race through the field as well. But if you know one guy is going to qualify 20 spots higher, that you're going to have an opportunity to do something with it a little bit later on in the process.
Yeah. It is kind of an interesting market. Just even seeing how far William Byron is matched up with Bubba. I know he's juiced, but man, we were talking about Byron. I was comparing him to Johnson 3 weeks ago, and now he's matched up with Bubba Wallace. That's
Expensive price tag there,
it
minus
is
a
an
buck
expensive
60 though.
price,
So
but still to see that interesting. Anyway, but yeah, I think that you have to qualify well at this point. If you're going to play anyone in the outright markets, as hard as it is to win these days, as hard as and competitive as pit road is, you got to start qualifying well, or you better have a damn fast race car. And if you're these Fords right now, you're none of those things at this point.
hey, it happens, and it's the way.
With all that being said, we'd like to talk to you about our best bet.
Yeah, exactly. More on that in just a
Yeah.
matter of moments. But we'll wave the green, white checkered flag on stage 2. You can follow Chris on social media at Chris Werme 15. I'm Todd Fuhrman. You can follow me there. Most importantly, as always, for all things Bet the Board related, be sure to follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. And stage 3, Wormser, I think will segue perfectly into where we want to go with the best bet portion of the program. And the idea when you're betting a sport like NASCAR, golf has a lot of similarities, and some of the stick and ball sports to a lesser extent. I kind of preface it this way: being okay with placing what I would call long-term losing bets. And the way that I go about articulating that is if you're betting a guy at 50-1, more often than not, that guy is not going to win a golf tournament. When you bet a
Right.
NASCAR driver at 150-1, you don't expect that he is going to win 10 races a year, and you're just going to pull one over on the odds makers and be able to get them to capitulate in any capacity. So when you attack the outright market, as I know a lot of NASCAR bettors do, looking to put up a little bit to make a lot, and you're avoiding the Denny Hamlins and the Kyle Larsons who are going to win the bulk of the races, as we've seen already this season. I'll throw William Byron in there as well. How do you go about balancing this in terms of keeping the portfolio, but being okay from a mindset standpoint that, you're not going to have the outright winner for 6 or 7 weeks in a row potentially, but, if you happen to hit 2 out of 10, because you're betting into the right price tags, that you're going to put yourself in the black, what matters most at season's end.
Well, there's a couple things. I don't think you meant long-term losing bets. Long-term would be winning bets, but week in and week out for the most
Okay,
part.
that's probably a
Yeah.
much better way to articulate it. So I
Yeah,
appreciate you clarifying that for me for sure.
yeah. So there's a couple things, a few things I want to talk about. Obviously, you want to make sure you're beating the market with these these long-term bets. Obviously, you're going to put together a race card. You're going to have a couple of long shots on there, 1 or 2, but you want to make sure that you're for sure beating the market. So that way, when you're adding some of these drivers like a Larson or a Hamlin, whoever you might think actually has a legit chance of winning the race, that you're kind of just reducing the hold that the casino has because you're getting the best number on all the drivers. So you want to make sure you're doing that and understand that picking off a driver at high odds, whether it's 100-1 or 200-1, isn't going to win very often. I'm trying to think of the last time. Chris Buescher won.
Chris Buescher at
Pocono, the fog race. Chris Buescher won at 300-1, and
Justin Haley at Daytona or whatever when he won. I'm trying to think about what some of the price tags were.
300-1 on Buescher was kind of the highest odds, and there were 0 bets on him at Superbook. So
SVG at 100-1 on the opener.
Yeah, but everyone was kind of on
that,
and that got bet down. So yeah, it's happened, but you just got to know that short run, that's not a short run play. This is a long run play. The other thing is you want to make sure you're getting paid on certain people. We've looked at this, when Chase Elliott, was capable of winning a race, but it took him a long time to get that first win. We saw him 25-1, 30-1 before races go. And that actually was kind of the case earlier this year. We saw that same kind of price, but we were seeing that with him when he was in competitive car, like leading a lot of laps. Same with Kyle Larson. It's like, hey, we've had a chance. There were times that I'm like 60-1 at California or at Homestead, and he's running kind of top 3, and you're just not getting this win, but they're up there so much that their price is getting reduced. We're seeing this a little bit with Ty Gibbs, where people are betting him at 18, 19, 20-1 every week, and he closes, 12 or 13-1. They want to get paid. They want to get that 20-1 payout on him. But right now he's just not. Could he win? Of course, but his car isn't there. So you just want to get paid on a driver. And there's a driver that, that we looked at 200-1 and a very small position, and Noah Gragson. I think I said at the beginning of the year, I think I said it on this podcast or I said it somewhere, that I thought that he was going to be the top running SHR car. And so far, he does look like that. He's the guy that can actually qualify well and kind of run in the top 10 all day. Now, is he driving past a ton of cars? No, but he's at least giving himself a shot to get these good finishes by qualifying well, giving himself a decent stall on pit road and finishing races. Now, I like him more at Kansas this week because this is where the high line comes in. And Noah Gragson, you can throw him in that same category, maybe not as good as Kyle Larson or Tyler Reddick, but he would be like the next guy that I would say has the talent to kind of get that right rear right up against the wall, use that air cushion and get back to the throttle. And if that happens, I do think that he could start, ripping the boards and make some ground up. He could be a guy that even if he doesn't qualify well, work his way up through the field because he's running a different line than other drivers. So this long run losing bets, you just hope you eventually get paid. The last thing you want is to play Gregson all the way down to where he's like 12-1 week in and week out, and then he wins and he goes off at 8-1.
I think we're a long way away from Noah Gragson going off at 8-1 in the outright market, Chris.
Yeah,
but I
know,
appreciate your optimism. I'm sure everyone at SHR and the Gregson family feels about his prospects to win races.
Yeah. Today's podcast brought to you by Stewart Haas Racing.
Exactly. Anybody from Stewart Haas out there listening who wants to sponsor the podcast, we can make a case for Ryan Priest to win a race next weekend, assuming the foam on the inside of his door doesn't catch on fire.
Yeah, no kidding. Just to finish a race would be good for Ryan Priest. That's kind of a bad few races for him, but it's just you have to know you're beating the market, and sometimes beating the market is just because you find yourself in some sort of group think where everyone's just firing on the same thing, or you're in a Discord where one guy thinks it's a good idea, therefore everyone fires and moves the market. That's not actually beating the market. I mean, technically it is, but you're not getting actually a consensus. It's more of a group think type move, but that'll happen. And it's like I said, you still get some CLV, but
we've seen that. I mean, some of the groupthink beat us to a head-to-head matchup in qualifying. Try to get the best of the number.
Well, that was your lazy ass.
Oh, no. Sometimes you have to meander down to the book because you can't get the same limits on the app, and you just happen to lose out on a price by 30 cents. But there's still substantial CLV working on our favor nonetheless at this point. But that's all about circumvention of limits and pretty much how we have to operate in this space. Because if they did give us what we were looking for on the apps more often than not, it would make our lives a hell of a lot easier. Yeah. But again, different discussion for a different day. So all of that discussion about Noah Gragson, Worm, takes us into the best bet portion of the program, where I have a feeling I know exactly where you're going in terms of trying to get exposure on the 10. And I can't imagine it's endorsing the outright bet for all of our listeners.
No. That's just that is. Yes, that's a perfect example of one of those bets that's probably going to lose, even if he looks great. But if all of a sudden you find yourself, you have three of the top four guys, and one of them, or the three of the top four, or three of the top five, and one of them is a 200-1, or you definitely feel more confident that you have some positive expected value when it comes to your betting card. However, we're going to stick with Group E. This is on Superbook. Not a great selection when we're of bets so far this week as we're kind of approaching this best bet. But Group E is Michael McDowell, Noah Gragson, and Carson Hocevar, and Austin Dillon. Noah Gragson is plus 250. He is the favorite. I like that bet. I think that he has the most upside. He's qualified well. He's been by far the fastest of those four cars, in my opinion. If you throw in the element that he really knows how to run this high line, has had a ton of success here in the Xfinity series, that just adds to the value that I think that this bet has. So Noah Gragson, Group E, plus 250. He has to beat Michael McDowell, Carson Hocevar, and Austin Dillon. That is the best bet for this week.
So I'll save you some of the trouble that inevitably will get asked of you. What would you feel comfortable betting Noah down to? Where would your cutoff?
I'd play him at 2-1.
210?
I'd play him at 2-1.
Okay.
I think if you look at those matchups, I'd make him a favorite over every one of those guys. Clearly, he is the favorite, but by a long shot. I think when we posted that Noah Gragson plus 125 over Austin Dillon. I mean, I think that should have been more of like a minus 185 bet in Noah Gregson's favor.
Wish I had a little bit. If had I known that, I wish I would have had a little bit more on it than I did. If you said that the market was a full $1 off, something that would have been useful being brought to my attention on Sunday, not on Wednesday. But go ahead.
I mean, whether I think it's $1 off, and it's also Noah Gregson. Let's not forget.
That's fair. That is fair. You have to
you
consider the source of who you're looking at.
I do think that there's just tremendous upside. I think he could be racing in the top 5 come the end of this race. Now, does he have a race-winning car? Probably not. But I just really trust this Gregson guy. When that groove moves up to the top, it's Larson, Reddick, and I would throw Gregson up there as one of the guys that can really get it done and find some lap time up there.
All right, we are all Noah Gregson fans this weekend, and we officially wave the checkered flag on the 1.5-mile trek to Kansas. All right, Wormser, I think that'll just about do it for today's fine program. I know you are counting the minutes, the days, the hours until we go to one of your favorite tracks in the Cup Series at good old Darlington next weekend. Throwback weekend, some great paint schemes that we are going to see. Overall, NASCAR does a great job for a phenomenal track that usually offers a ton of upside and wagering opportunities. So any parting shots, things that you would like to get off your chest before we bid our listeners a fond farewell as we head to Kansas?
When are you going to come on the pre-race poll next?
I'll have to try and figure it out. I mean, I'm now 1 for 1 picking the outright winner. So
yeah, that's right.
I may just have to retire. I mean, some of us believed in the 11 car of Denny Hamlin. Some of us may have picked Ryan Blaney. So it may be time for me to retire, one and done.
I'm done.
But we'll figure it out. Maybe, I don't know, All-Star Weekend I don't think is in the cards. Maybe Darlington, we'll see, or we'll figure out something a little deeper into the campaign. But I will make a return appearance there on the pre-race poll. I appreciate you letting me invade that fine program. And you even did a post-race show last week. I
did a little app race NASCAR where I just kind of, it was an okay race for us. I mean, Suarez obviously
made a crumb.
Yeah, made a crumb. We crumbed them, which, hey, you need those crumbs every now and then. So
looking for that
I'm
win.
I'm going to try it and just see what happens. App race NASCAR. It's on the YouTube channel that I do the pre-race poll and also on X. And it's a pretty interactive. Obviously, I have some stuff planned, but normally just kind of winging it and kind of take over what if the TV a lot of the times doesn't have a great post-race stuff. So I like to give my 2 cents. So we'll see what happens, whether I keep doing that or not, but figured I'd give it a try.
Beauty. Always great to get more NASCAR content, both early in the week to get your mind in the right spot, pre-race stuff once you have practice data to work with, watch the race and try and digest what you've seen unfold in front of you for the previous 3 to 4 hours. That'll do it for the Stay Green podcast. Follow Chris on Twitter at ChrisWerme15. I'm Todd Fuhrman. You can follow me there. Most importantly, follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. But most importantly, with a group bet ticket in hand on the 10 of Noah Gregson come Sunday afternoon, we will see you at the window.